Okay, look, a quick apology for not having made any videos. It must be about 6 months, maybe more than that. I apologise for that. And this isn't going to be like much of a production, I'm afraid. But I watched Matt Walsh's video, What is a Woman? It's about an hour and a half long. It's a film, a sort of documentary film, I suppose. To be taken with a pinch of salt. It's by somebody who's firmly in one camp, and that needs to be borne in mind. And as always with these things, it's the most polarised people that make the most interesting viewing, so those are the people that you get to hear from. But nevertheless, there were some things that I found quite concerning on that. I mean, look, Matt Walsh is not somebody who I'm happy bedfellows with. I don't think I've probably got that many opinions in common with Matt. And even on this particular issue, I don't wholly agree with Matt's position whatsoever. But some of the responses that he got from people was kind of concerning. There were people like Miriam Grossman, who I suppose was there. She was a psychiatrist taking his side, if you like. And Marie Bowers, who's a surgeon who does gender reassignment surgeries, who would be taking the opposite perspective. And what was interesting with people like this was just how the level of certitude that they had. Particularly, I would say, Marie Bowers kind of took my breath away at times with her certitude over things that might not manifest themselves for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. And yet there was like her level of conviction. Sometimes conviction is admirable, but in circumstances like this, I just find it kind of scary. You know, I mean, what I expect from somebody like that, from a medical professional, is a degree of caution and introspection. And, well, this is what we believe to be the right course of action, but we're going to have to monitor it. Time will tell. We're trying to act in good faith. There was none of that whatsoever. It was just absolute certitude. The kind of certitude that some of the most worrying people throughout history will have had. Maybe that's a little bit unfair. Maybe that's poisoning the well a little bit there. But that's kind of how that came across to me. There was Michelle Fortier. She was an interesting character, a doctor paediatrician. And she said some of the strangest things, possibly in the whole... She said the kind of things that people say, nobody is saying this. And she said them all, you know. Matt said to her that he's male because he produces sperm, and she said, well, sperm doesn't make you male. So the essential characteristic that defines being male across the biological world doesn't make you male. I mean, that's kind of like the one datum point we have is the small gamete, large gamete, and everything else comes after the fact, right? Everything else is window dressing. It's linked. It's an accidental property that we apply and associate with male or female by dint of association with those individuals in any species that produce the large gametes or small gametes. So to then say that one essential property that defines what male means in the system of sexual reproduction doesn't make you male, well, then you've just decoupled that from any sort of definitional basis whatsoever. But it seems that that's kind of the way that she works all round. He asked her about Santa Claus and kids believing in Santa Claus and saying, you know, basically what he was trying to say is young children really aren't maybe don't know enough about the world to make some of these decisions. And she says, but Santa Claus does deliver their Christmas presents like it was a matter of fact. And he says, but that isn't real though. And she said to that child, they are.
Agreed. But Santa Claus is real for them, but
yeah.
Santa Claus is not actually real.
Yeah, well, but Santa Claus does deliver their Christmas presents.
Well, yeah, but he's not real, though.
To that child, they are.
What sort of notion of truth is this, right? That effectively what is true, and there was other people throughout the video who said the same thing, that effectively if you believe it, it's true. Presumably if you believe the moon is made of cheese, then to Michelle Fortier, to you, that is the truth. The moon, to you, the moon is made of cheese. I don't know how you even go about being a medical practitioner, if that's your perspective. I think she probably doesn't. We're back to the same kind of things we sometimes had that I've criticised religious people for sometimes, where the kind of perspectives they have for their religious belief I've said, I don't believe that you apply that anywhere else in your life, because if you did, you just couldn't live on a day-to-day basis. You couldn't analyse anything else if you took that same perspective. And I think that's the same kind of thing going on here. I don't believe that Michelle Fortier can actually live what she says, because maybe she can in this one little issue. But outside of that, she can't apply that, because nothing. You couldn't ascribe anything to anything. You couldn't say anything with any degree of certitude. And I found it very, very confusing. They talked about chickens, and it was another rather bizarre conversation. And Matt got to the point where he was talking about chickens being female. And he said, but you know a chicken's female if it's laying eggs.
A chicken has sex like any biological
chicken has
organism.
an assigned gender, but a chicken doesn't have a gender identity.
So we assign female to chickens when they lay eggs?
We assume they're female if they lay eggs.
And she said, no, we assume that it's female if it lays an egg. I didn't really know. I would like to have known what she meant by that. It wasn't clear from that what she was getting at. Was she trying to suggest that effectively the letters FEMALE that create the word female could mean anything? It could mean this can of diet lemonade. And by assume female, we mean it's just that we assume we're going to ascribe those letters to those characteristics. Or was she kind of suggesting, it almost suggests like she's suggesting chickens have a gender identity, and whatever their gender identity is, that's what their sex is. But she'd only just said that chickens don't have a gender identity. So it wasn't clear what she was trying to get at. Is she trying to say that chickens neither have a gender identity nor a sex? It was just mind-boggling what she was trying to get at. And she was one of these people that made the claim. She said, a woman is someone who claims that is their identity. I have to say, if that is what we mean by woman, and I don't, I've made videos where I've tried to define what I think a woman is. And it's substantially more complicated than that. It's not a simple thing, but it is a thing. It's something that I've nailed my flag to and said. But this doesn't help anybody, I don't think. I don't think that kind of definition, it doesn't clarify things for us. And I don't think it even helps most binary trans people, trans women in this case, because it just turns woman into meaningless mush. It's no different to having a name. It's no different to be called Clive. What is a Clive? A Clive is somebody who has the name Clive, right? That's all it is. It's just a name, and it means absolutely nothing. Well, if all a woman is someone who claims that woman is their identity, then it's just like a name, isn't it? That's all it is. It's just a name. And surely that's... If you strip people, if you have somebody who is biologically male, who can't stop being biologically male, because technically that just ain't possible, but they don't feel like that, they feel female, their brain identifies as female, sort of female facing. If you take woman away by turning it into this crap, this mush, this meaninglessness, then I don't think you're helping them. That doesn't seem to be pro-trans for me, sort of taking the words man and woman and turning them into nothingness. Then there was this guy, Patrick Grozanka, a professor of women, gender and sexuality studies at the University of Tennessee. And, well, he tried to define woman, and I have to say that, like, he obviously did try and lay out a decent definition, and we never really got to hear that, because Matt Walsh did this kind of little comedic thing where they made it seem like he's giving a really long definition, so that's boring. So they spliced it in with some funny music, presumably for a bit of comedic value. Although I don't know why, because I get the feeling Matt isn't a very sort of comedy-driven guy, you know. He's a bit po-faced. There was a bit at the end where he asks his wife, and it's like, that's the knockdown moment. She says, adult human female, and then in this very sort of traditional way she hands him a pickle jar, and he takes the lid off the pickle jar, like that's a man's role, to take the lid off. You know, it would have been, I would have thought there that he could have lightened that up showed a bit of humanity himself, tried to open the pickle jar, failed, and then passed it back to her, and she could have took the lid off, right? It wouldn't have detracted from the point he was trying to make, but it would have just shown that he's actually got a bit of a sense of humour, that he's not quite as po-faced as I suspect he probably is. But he tried to make this comedy moment with this Patrick Grzanka, and I didn't think that helped. But I got the feeling with everything else that this Patrick said that he really didn't want to nail his flag to the mast on any of this, right? That he was very, very careful, very judicious in what he said and what he didn't say. That it's almost as if, and I've seen this a lot of times, in these kinds of circles, there's lots and lots of people that have lots of different ideas, right? And it's not like other scientific fields where if you're looking at, say, physics, different people have these different understandings of what quantum mechanics is all about, right? And they'll all argue about it, and that's all regarded as fine. Now, their interpretation, that isn't, I think that's wrong because of this is what I think's right, and that's fine. But it's like in this kind of field of social sciences, nobody wants to tread on anybody else's toes and invalidate what anybody else might think. So there's a lot of sort of tiptoeing around. We saw that tiptoeing around elsewhere in the video, where groups of women who are on women's marches and various other things were asked, what is a woman? And none of them seemed capable of answering. They all just suddenly dulled into silence. Now,
What is a woman?
A woman?
But you guys are all
Yeah.
women?
We're all women.
Yes,
Yes.
we're women.
So how would you define it, like in the simplest terms?
That is hard.
Yeah, it is. It is a stumper.
I'm quite sure Matt picked the groups that were dulled into silence. It may well have been that he'd interviewed some others that hadn't been. But it kind of mind boggles, doesn't it, that you would go on a march for something, campaign something, have strong views, and yet you cannot even begin to define what that thing is. I can't think of another analogy. I can't think of another situation like that. Even things that are tough to define, like gods, and religions and things like that. If you ask people, they'll give you their definition, and they won't be shy about that. They'll tell you what they think, and yet it seems as if everybody's scared, or a lot of people here are scared to do that in case their definition isn't quite the same as somebody else's, and then they're going to be offended at it. So it's best just not to say anything at all, or make one of these self-referential, a woman is somebody who identifies as a woman definitions that isn't a definition. You know, it's no different to saying, what is a bison? A bison is whatever we call a bison, right? That's not a definition of a bison. You know, a phone is something that we call a phone. That's not a definition. That's just useless. That's just telling you that, well, this is a word that, if that's all it is, that is a word that is precisely useless. It has no informational content whatsoever. So there was that, and what was interesting with this Grzanka as it went on was that he got angry when Matt started talking. Bear in mind that this is a guy who is a professor in a department at a university. And universities are surely, if anything, they're a search for the truth. Now, there may be situations where we dispute really what we mean by truth, that there are different ways of looking things, different ways of perspectives of viewing the world, of course. But to suggest as soon as Matt started talking about the truth, he started to get pretty angry, pretty hot under the collar.
Because it sounds actually deeply transphobic to me. If you keep probing, we're gonna stop the interview.
If I probe about what the truth is?
You keep invoking the word truth, which is condescending and rude.
He called the word truth transphobic, condescending, and rude. If you're in a department that's investigating, in this case, women, gender and sexuality studies, and you're so scared of ideas of that there's some kind of truth, that there's something that you can actually analyse, that you can define your basic terms. It's a professor of women, gender and sexuality studies, and the truth that Matt wanted was just some kind of definition of woman. surely if you've got a department of women's studies, you've got to have some kind of understanding of woman to begin with, to be able to address women's studies, don't you? It just seemed very, very strange. And he went down this, why are you bothered? Why are you asking these questions?
What is a woman?
Why do you ask that question?
Why would you possibly be bothered by this? This is somebody who's a professor of fucking gender studies asking somebody, why would you be bothered by an issue pertaining to this? It makes me think that in these departments that some questions are probably verboten. They're off the table. There are certain things that can't be discussed. Are certain ways of doing these things that are sort of off the table, you know. And it reminded me of there was a series called something like Hjørnevask or something like that. It was a Norwegian series about a 7-parter about gender and identity. A really good series. I advise you to go and look, and a really fascinating series. And there was the same thing there, where the guy who's making the documentary goes to speak to somebody in one of these departments, and he's discussing gender and nature versus nurture. It may have been to do with homosexuality and heterosexuality, and whether they're innate or whether they're learnt, or whether it's a mixture of the two. And the guy's like, why would you want to even ask those questions? Why would you even want to know? You know, it's like there's something sinister with wanting to know these things. And it makes you feel like, for some of these people, these academics whose stock in trade is supposed to be looking at these things, that there are some things that are just off the table. That are like sacred ground that you don't walk upon, questions that you don't ask. It's kind of, it's concerning to me that we've got that far down, and that these people, some of them, are that reticent to actually almost give an opinion, because they know that some other people who are their colleagues will have maybe just slightly different opinions. And so it's like everybody, it's a bit like the writing of some of the books of the Old Testament, you know, where it's understood that in those parts of the world there were several versions of the same story. So that the people that combined the Bible had to sort of combine these different stories and have elements of all of them to keep everybody happy. That there's a kind of academic version of that going on. And then finally, to sum it up, there was this gay guy that he talks to in the street. It was a smaller interview, but he's sort of asking this guy, what is a woman? And the gay guy says, only a woman knows what a woman is. And it's not the first time I've heard this. And it's one of these things, I've said this loads of videos before, where people say things as if it's just, well, obviously, you know, this is the way we treat anything. You know, it's just said as if that's immediately obvious. Well, only a woman would know what a woman is. And yet that's not immediately intuitive. I can't think of any other example where it's like that. I know what an old person is without being an old person. I know what a toddler is. You don't have to be a toddler to know what a toddler is. You don't have to be a baby to know what a baby is. You don't have to be an armchair to know what an armchair is, right? So why would that be with a woman? That only a woman could define what a woman is. You know, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And he asks him something along those lines, Matt. He says to him, he sort of catches him out. It's quite funny, actually. He says to him, do you identify as a cat? And he says, no, I don't identify as a cat. So he says, well, what is a cat? And then the guy, it looks like this gay guy, like he's just about to answer what a cat is, and then realises that if he does that, he's just sort of, it's quite hypocritical given what he's just said, because he isn't a cat. So how can he identify what a cat is? So he just says, do you know what? Oh, this was a mistake talking to you. I'm not talking to you anymore. And then flounces off.
Women only know what women are.
Are you a cat?
No.
Can you tell me what a cat is?
This is actually a genuine mistake. I am sorry I even came up there.
Down the road, which was quite amusing. But it also made me think with regard to that. I just don't buy. It's just crap that gay guy doesn't have some idea of what a woman is, because he doesn't identify as a woman. right? So how does he know he's not a woman if he doesn't have any idea, even just some ballpark definition of what a woman is, of how you would define a woman and how you would define not woman? You have to have something. If I said to you, are you a Squirgleberg? You'd say, well, I don't really know, because I have no concept of what a Squirgleberg is, right? But if I say, are you a woman, then you'd probably answer that question, right? So you can't answer that question unless you've got some understanding. It might not be perfect. It might be that you accept this is really complicated and it's quite amorphous and it's not necessarily that easy to nail down. Some things are like that. I accept that. Some things are not amenable to hard and fast, certainly simple definitions, even though in some contexts we need definitions, right? With things like this, if we're going to use woman or female, man or male, if we're going to use these in legal documents, in laws, etc., then in those contexts we need a fucking definition of what they are, right? But maybe personally you've not arrived at your absolute dotted the I's and crossed the T's definitions, but you've got some idea. Otherwise, like this chap here, you wouldn't be able to say, well, I can't say it because I'm not a woman. Ask a woman. You know, he's got to have had some kind of internal understanding of what a woman is to be able to make that statement. It's kind of bizarre where we're at now, and I don't think it's helpful. Ultimately, this is what I predict, is that we will look back on this in a few years time, where I believe that the world will be less transphobic, will be more accommodating and amenable to trans people, and I hope that's the case. I really do. I hope the sports situation, which I've nearly made videos on several times the last few months and then sort of held back because there's been some interesting things there, hopefully that will get resolved. I think that is a major bone of contention still. Doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon. That is creating unnecessary tension, often including people who otherwise are very sympathetic to trans people in the camp of people who are not sympathetic. That ought to set alarm bells ringing that maybe this issue isn't being handled particularly well by the sort of trans acceptance lobby stroke side, whatever you want to call it. But I hope that moving forwards things get better, but it ain't going to be due to this, right? Because I don't see how this is helping anybody. Turning the terms man and woman into meaningless mush do not help people whose sense of identity depends a lot more on the words man and woman than mine does. I can fall back on male, right? I can say, do you know what? Man is meaningless. Well, that doesn't matter. I'm a typical biological male. I'm happy with that. That'll do me, right? But for some people, they feel male, but they're not. And they need a word to describe that. They need something to hang that sense of identity on. And I truly believe that what's happening at the moment, actually, maybe from people who think they're doing good, but it's actually taking that away from them. I think ultimately it'll be shown to have done more harm than good. Okay, that's it. I will try and get back to making some proper videos sometime soon. Maybe this will give me a little bit of the motivation to do so. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.